Hi, I'm Bonnie Kimke. Welcome to my studio and welcome to Quilting on a Thread. I've been quilting for probably 55 years and nothing makes me happier than to pull something off of my sewing machine than to pull that apart and find a perfect point. I'm going to show you how I teach my students to get that perfect point. So I have you here so you can see what I'm doing, because I do this at the machine. Now, I don't do all these steps myself every single time, but it is how I teach people to quilt. So what you want to do is I'm joining at this point two sets of 4 squares that have already been joined, and you can see they've got that nice point, both of them. So it's very important now to maintain that line of seam horizontally, because I'm going to join these two horizontally. So what I want to do is make sure that I have the bottom and that it's oriented, the bottom square, and it's oriented with the top row, bottom row, and then the top square oriented top row, bottom row. Now that I have them laid out this way, and normally I'm doing this on a flat surface, I will flip that so I'm joining the bottom of the top square to the top of the bottom square. And I want to go ahead and line the top edges up. But that's only part of it. This is where a lot of people stop. They line the top edges up, they're ready to sew. No, you're not ready to sew. You want to come in here and make sure that those two seams are butted up. Now you can do this with seams opened and ironed, or you can do this with seams ironed to the side. I'm doing it with seams ironed to the side. And so I find the top seam ironed off to the right in this case, and one seam ironed off to the right and one seam ironed off to the left. I butt them up. Now I also use the light of my machine, and I can see that that isn't completely lined up there. So what I do is I come down and I finger press it together to get it all butted up. Now that it's butted up, this is the part that I don't do, but I teach my students to do it until they're comfortable. I will take 2 pins and I will put one on one side of that seam, avoiding the ironed over part of the previous seam, and I'll put 1 pin on this side. So now I come in and check again to make sure that they really are butted up to each other. So now that I've got that in place, this is the part that will make your seams perfect. Rotate that square around and line up those seams, just as though you were going to sew through them, but you're not. Take this seam and go through the stitches, top and bottom. Come back around, do that on the bottom of this square setup. Go through the stitches, top and bottom. You want to make sure that you went through the stitches, so check the bottom, and then you're going to come around to this 4th side, and you're going to go through the stitches. Ideally, you will go through the stitches and not through any of the other material. Does that make sense? You're going to go through directly where it's stitched. Now you have a square that if you lay it out, it's perfectly flat, and you're going to sew this seam. So bring it over to your machine. Use whatever method you use to guarantee a perfectly straight scant 1/4 inch, and you're going to sew almost up to the seam. Then you're going to lift it up and make sure that your bottom seam has not gotten curled. All I'm doing is holding that stitch in place, holding that seam allowance in place, and go stitch right on over it. Now here comes the part that's going to tell us whether we did right or wrong. So remove all those excess pins. You don't need them. Now here's the magic. Pull out the 2 that you had on either side of the seam and open up. Nothing makes me happier than that. I call this quilting nirvana. That's another perfect point. Not only is the corner perfect, but I have a half square triangle here, and look at that. That point is as perfect as the others. I'm going to trim my seams, and I'm going to press. And that is quilting nirvana. By using the pins that I use when I teach my students, that can make or break a quilt. Because if all of your corners aren't perfectly lined up, or as close as possible, if they aren't perfectly lined up, what starts happening is you get fullness in your quilt. I hope this helps you on your quilting journey. It's certainly been useful on my early years in quilting, and occasionally when I'm working with something really tricky, I'll come back to the needle process, the pin process. But it's always been helpful to me when it's necessary, and I hope that it becomes helpful to you. I'd like to see you again sometime here on Quilting on a Thread. Bye-bye now.